Okay, so we are now starting this conference with Sarah Surak, who I appreciate your acceptance of our invitation. Just for present to introduce Sarah, Professor Sarah for you, is she is Professor Emerita of the Department of Political Science and Environmental Studies at Salisbury University. Her in United States. Her academic research focuses on civic education, democratic engagement, and environment political theory. She is particularly interested in the political of the waste of wasting and the political and economic governance of garbage. Her current she has, if you allows me, she has an interesting Instagram page with a lot of pictures about garbages. Her current project critically interrogates the relationships among waste, capitalism, and utopian possibilities. She is based in Hamburg, Germany. She regularly facilitates workshops on civic reflection methods, dialogue techniques, and sustainability focused utopian visioning. Surak is a co-editor of the journal New Political Science, and now we have a new chapter of the collection Brazil, Grande Recusa. We are translating this collection some works of Marcuse. The last one is Ecology and Revolution in Herbert Marcuse, and Sarah is one of the authors of this new translation with amazing chapter of this book. So, Sarah traduziu, fez parte de livro que a gente está traduzindo do Marcuse sobre ecologia, e ela tem lá capítulo a respeito. So, Sarah, have your time. Feel free. Time is yours.
Thank you, Silvio. I am delighted to be here today. And if I start to, I can hear some feedback. Turn this down a little bit. Please let me know if I should speak more slowly or repeat something. When I get excited, which I always am talking about Marcuse, I tend to go fast, but I'll try not to do that today. I'm delighted to be the first lecturer of what looks like a fantastic 2 days of events. Thank you for dealing with my time issues. I'm, ahead standing here in Hamburg, Germany. I'm jealous to not be in Brazil, a country I love to visit very much, and a country that could teach the US a lot about political accountability recently in terms of thinking about what's going on in politics. There's lots of inspiring points from Brazil that we should take throughout the world, I believe. Also, Silvio, thank you for inviting me because I haven't been thinking about my academic work on utopia recently. I've been doing more practice than academic writing, and it's been a really big pleasure to revisit some of my work I've written in the past on utopia, the new work in the field, and to think about it from a particular perspective. And that's the perspective that I and we are sitting in today. Oh, wait, I didn't change my slides. Hold on. Sorry. I have slides. Let's see if I can do this. Oh, no. I might not be able to share my slides without restarting my computer or without restarting Chrome.
You want to send me by WhatsApp and I can try here?
Well, I'd prefer to do them here. If you would let me pop off this call for 1 second, I will be back with it restarted. Just let me back in the room in 1 minute. All I have to do is reopen my Chrome, okay?
Okay. Tudo bem de falar só em inglês? Vocês querem uma tentativa de tradução? A vantagem de não ter a tradução é que fica mais fluente, mas se vocês quiserem, a sala é super legal. Assim, não entendi, mas vocês podem...
That was quick.
Okay, very quick.
Let's see, I just had to share my microphone and my, there we go. Can you see? Perfect.
Okay, let's be...
There we go. Fantastic. Yeah, so I'll continue to thank Silvio for inviting me, because sitting from the particular point of today, I have a lot of hope about where we can go with a better world. And I want to reflect a little bit on some of the work I've been doing with civic education, non-formal adult education, and democratic engagement in the topic of utopia, which fits well within these 5 categories of the work that's being done. I also hope we can have a bit of a conversation, because I like to learn from others, and even though I'm not in Brazil, would like to be able to do so. So with that, my hope is that in this discussion today, that we can weave together a few threads. As I was preparing this discussion, I kept thinking about weaving a tapestry, or bringing together threads that we need to think about a new world. And I think we can do that together. I think that we can grow this together, and I absolutely think that that is possible, which is an important framing for how I approach my research and my practice. And as I was thinking about what this meant to pull together the practice of engagement and the theory of utopia, and the work of Marcuse and others, what I kept thinking as an overall theme was this phrase of the pursuit of a more democratic and egalitarian economic, social, and political system. Now, I admit the reason I'm often thinking about this phrase is that it is the overview, the tag of the journal that Silvio says that we co-edit, but I like it. It's always stuck in my head, because it doesn't, while we might want to use words like utopia or socialism in the US context, it's easier to get around shutting down conversation, or to help people be more open to new thoughts, if we avoid some words that people don't really know how to define or don't really think about. I teach a class in political theory where we talk about socialism, fascism, communism, liberalism, and I know that these are not things that we define well, but I do think this idea of democratic, egalitarian, just systems is language that can bring us together in a movement towards thinking about what a utopia could look like. And this is a collectively constructed definition, like it was constructed collectively by the Caucus for a New Political Science. This was not me, Caucus for a Critical Political Science, but I do think that it's one that we can take seriously in thinking about our intellectual and our engagement outside of the classroom, our efforts towards the better world that we can move to. I also want to note that I come from an American perspective, as you are all hearing in English, and I read the literature of my colleagues globally. But I've been thinking in particular about the American experience at this moment. So I'll be talking a bit about that today. And I hope that my intention is not to propose something for everyone that's universal, that is an answer. I wish I had an answer that would be easy, just to say, here's the answer, let's move on. But rather something from one perspective through which we can bring multiple together and learn from each other. I've had a very amazing, productive academic experience learning from my colleagues like Silvio in Brazil, as we talk about utopia and democracy and the better world that we all want to see. And I'll say that this is important because what we do see is a vision. And what I think we need to contend with today is that there is a vision on the right of how the world should look globally. That vision is one that's top down. It's not bottom up. It's not democratic. It's top down, it's dominating. It's much easier to have a vision when you have a top down, strong man and increasingly strong woman idea of what the world should look like and how our problems should be framed and who we should blame for these problems. And this increasingly international discourse is very similar across countries, which you know from what we've seen in places like Brazil, United States, Hungary, Poland, even in the far right in Germany, and so on. And what we need to be thinking about doing is how we counter this vision, because the right has a vision and they communicate this vision. And while there are visions in the academic literature, or maybe the lefty verso press reading people on the left, right? We've got the radical Green New Deal, which was, right before COVID. We have the fully automated luxury communism. There are some of these proposals for a vision and a better world, but they're not something that we tend to see, at least not in the United States until recently, and at least not with a global dialogue bubbling up in the same way that the right is able to bring down from the top what this should be. And this, I think, is a problem. And I think this is something that we need to think very deeply about, because the appeal from one of the appeals from the right wing is not only the strong men or the strong politicians or the influencers who may or may not be bots located wherever in the world, is that there is a big tent collective idea that is not consistent, but it is something that people very much understand what is the problem and what should be done about it. And as we see left-wing politicians are gaining support and winning elections, we need to be thinking about how to respond to this on the left. And I think one of the ways we need to be thinking about this is through visioning a better world, visioning a better future, helping people understand that something is different. I want to note that there is really good scholarship that has come out recently about this international right vision. And it is strategically brilliant. It is a long game. That's why it's working very well, regardless of what it might mean for people in their daily lives. And there's been some good work in the US by Isaac Kamola, Clyde Barrow, Douglas Beats, Emily Hauptman, talking about the long game vision starting in the 1950s with people in the United States, but also in Europe, to help think how to get this right-wing hard turn. And they have been incredibly successful. This didn't come from nowhere. It didn't come from Trump. It didn't come from a person. And I think that's important to think about if one wants to counter that vision, that we need to be thinking about these longer term strategies that have worked through universities, through institutional think tanks, through influential people. And this is sort of centering around, I think, what is needed within critical theory, what is needed within critical practice today. Now, this idea of, theorists and scholars have long pointed out why visioning a different world is dangerous, or at the very least, even those who might be friendly to more progressive ideas are often very hesitant to encourage a new world thinking. Karl Mannheim wrote in 1929 that the representatives of a given order will label as utopian all concepts that are different from their point of view, that in their principles cannot be realized. And they will try to protect this political order because, quote, the disappearance of they will try to put, I'm getting ahead of myself. They will try to protect the political order. And that when we don't have utopia as a way to counter the idea of the status quo, we simply have the status quo reproduced. You've been reading Mark Fisher. He says that basically when we give into doom, when we give into doom and gloom, when we give up, we support the status quo. And the goal of the status quo is to not disrupt power. This was a huge critique of the Democratic Party and continues to be in the United States, that the countering Trump has been so poor because the Democratic Party doesn't want to shake up a status quo because it could mean that people in power would lose power. It's very problematic. We can talk, a bit about that as we go through the talk. I also want to point out that there's a lot of, I'm a political scientist who does political theory as well. So I'm trained in political theory, but within political science. And a lot of what I've been trying to do recently is diagnose and think about the current right-wing movement, both from the theory aspect, but also from some of the political things that are going on the ground. So I'll put a little bit more of my political science hat on today to think through where we are as we think about theory. And the conversations since 2016 in the United States and more so globally have focused on a crisis of democracy. We're in a crisis. We're seeing liberal democracy as backsliding. We see this in the quantitative work that shows empirically measures of freedom, press freedom, voting intimidation, these sorts of things that we consider bad for democracy are on the rise. And this crisis we talk about is just basically saying we're losing stability in liberal democracy. But the question that we don't often ask, or I think that the people who are not critical theorists are not asking, is what are we trying to stabilize? What type of democracy? What type of practice? We are, and as we start to see more and more issues as to why liberal democracy can lead to socialism or fascism, we see that these issues with liberal democracy are becoming stronger and unveiling, revealing, showing cracks in the system and the problems of the system that are there, which is incredibly useful for a critique of the system and incredibly terrible for people's everyday lives that have to live within a system. So we have that there. We have that to think about. But I want to begin with a little bit of hope as to why today, and recently I've been thinking about utopia in a like dreamy-eyed way as I stare at Zoran Mamdani and his win as a democratic socialist in New York. Now, the left in the United States is very quick to critique itself, but there are a lot of left academics, left scholars, and prominent left activists that say we need to really be thinking and we need to be excited about what's going on in New York. Even Die Linke here in Germany is saying Zoran is the future, right? I'm not actually sure how much connection Linke and the Democratic Socialists of America have, but there we are. Everyone likes a winner, including Donald Trump, which I'll say about in a moment. So while there is left infighting, and we can see critiques of his meeting with Trump, Mamdani's win has provided some like actual evidence, some quantitative evidence of this ability to think through and people to want a better world, and for people to want a world that fits their needs rather than the needs of capital. And this is so incredible to see now. I will say, if you haven't seen the clip, I have to put here on the clip of Mamdani on the bicycle here, because I'll talk in a minute about Mamdani's social media campaigns. But there's a video of him on a cyclist and someone yells, "Communist," and he goes, "I think you mean cyclist, like bicyclist." I mean, he's just brilliant on his feet, and he's charismatic and he's always there. And it's quite a delight to watch. I want to point out that his win, as much as people try to critique that his win was simply because he's good on social media, he won in lots of demographics across New York. He won in higher income residents. He won in middle income residents. He won in Hispanic residents. we saw a lot of support for a person who did not back down on pro-Palestinian rights, on wanting affordable housing, on having called Trump a fascist. He didn't back down on any of these things, and he has yet to do so. And he still won the election. He was competing against a terrible person who New Yorkers knew for lots of reasons was problematic. But there was a ton of money put into this campaign, and big corporations threatened to leave New York. Trump threatened to send in the National Guard. All of these sorts of things were happening in this campaign, and he managed to win. President Trump also ran a successful campaign based on the economy. This was what Mamdani ran on, the economy. We need to be able to afford living in New York City. President Trump ran the campaign while an estimated 30% of the population would support him anyways. He made gains in every county are sort of smaller divisions within states, except for, I think, 2 in the entire United States, even after January 6th and everything else with Donald Trump, the court cases, he still gained voting everywhere. And he ran on the economy, affordability, everyday life, these sorts of key issues. The big idea was bringing down the price of eggs in the grocery store. That's all he talked about the whole time. He talked about those issues while Harris basically owned the current economy from Joe Biden. This is how Trump won. This is also largely how Mamdani won. Now, while Trump was making these arguments that he would also mass deport people and do everything else that he's actually doing, the economic data shows, or the polling data shows, that people voted for Trump because of the economy more so than any other reason that we have. We see the same arguments made by Mamdani, though, that affording a good life, having things like buses that run on time and that people can take, having an environment that people want to go out and be in, being able to buy things and live, having childcare, these sorts of things that we don't have readily necessarily if you don't have a lot of money in the United States. And in the end, Trump voters also voted for Mamdani. I'll add that in 2016, we saw that that voters that had voted for Trump, a lot of them had also voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary and Barack Obama. These are not people voting based solely on race or identity. These are people voting on a candidate that says they will give them a better life, because of the economic decline in the United States for a majority of people is very real. And there is a huge difference between those who have and those who have not. And what we see here are when people are given or advertised this idea of a better world, they are absolutely wanting it. And it's not simply saying, I will give you things. Mamdani's entire race was based on, here's a policy, here's what we need, here's how we do it. Shocking, I know. Like, this is exactly what we should see in any political race, but this is not what we usually see in the United States, and this was definitely not what we saw from his opponent in these ways. Now, Jacobin magazine has had the best coverage of Mamdani, of course, as a democratic socialist, and I know that the academic data will soon catch up, but they had a really great article recently showing that his TikTok videos, which of course, the platform most highly used by young people, also most highly voted on, in his TikTok videos, he was talking about rent, how much you pay for an apartment, childcare, cost of living, public transportation, climate, Gaza, public resources, these sorts of things. And his opponent was not. Cuomo was not talking about them. We see that these are the types of policies people heard about, and these are the types of policies that people are interested in. And even Donald Trump, who said in the White House, it's okay, everyone calls me a fascist, had no problem with that, was charmed by this person who not only won, because Trump likes the winner, but he stood there and said the same thing. He did not change his progressive democratic socialism values at all, right? And so these are the sorts of things in the US that we have to hold on to, because we don't have a lot of this focus, especially from people winning electoral politics, in thinking about what it means to have a better world. Now, is Mondani a socialist? No. Is he proposing the end to capitalism? No. But what he is doing is helping to spark imagination of what could be better, the imagination of what we could have in this world. And this, to me, is from Marcuse, thinking about his lecture from 1967 in London, the one that inspired the title for this talk, is what we need to be doing, even in these smaller steps, like a mayoral campaign in New York that everyone in the US had an opinion on. As Marcuse said, we must become aware of the essentially new features which distinguish a free society as a definite negation of the established societies. And we must begin to formulate these features, no matter how metaphysical, no matter how utopian. I would even say, no matter how ridiculous we may appear to normal people in all camps on the right as well as on the left. Marcuse is writing during the social movements of the 1960s, the student movements, the ultimately successful movements for racial equality or towards racial equality and gender equality in the United States. And he's writing from a time where utopianism is framed from a socialist or at least left framing. As I mentioned before, we're seeing a framing from the right. And this is exactly kind of what we need to counter in these larger ideas of how we're framing the world around us and what we need to see. So I think that what we can do for Marcuse, and what I want to do here, is in line with the Frankfurt School and Marcuse himself, is that we need to, beyond diagnosis, the purpose of think about critical theory as emancipation from all forms of repression, but also this in three parts. So Douglas Kellner very succinctly points out what he thinks the purpose of critical theory should be, and this is first generation, we don't always see this today, is description, critique, projection of alternatives. It's as easy as this. We are very good as scholars as description and critique. We are all good at description and critique. The hard part is projection of alternatives. And the even harder part is to normalize or make part of our everyday political and social interactions the normalization of thinking about alternatives, that they are possible. I will ask my students in class, for example, if we were to design a policy in the United States for environmental something for the environment, how would we do it? And they first come to cost. How much would it cost? And I always say, what if we didn't design a policy based on how much it cost? And they're like, what? Like, we have in our frame that we can only do things based on cost. That is only one way to define. That is a very neoliberal, capitalistic, bureaucratic liberalism way to limit possibility. That's how we maintain the order that we already have, even a liberal democracy order that provides less pain and less suffering for people in the world. For Marcuse, we need emancipation. We need a true freedom, not a pseudo freedom, in which we need to have freedom to make decisions not based on limited, predetermined choices of who we can vote for and these sorts of things, but rather we need to have the freedom to decide the world in which we live. And Marcuse's work describing how late capitalism's one-dimensionality encourages or discourages dialectical thinking and obscures the chance to have visions of emancipation remains incredibly relevant today. And it's from Marcuse that I think there are threads that we can weave together in thinking about utopia. At least from my perspective, this is how I'm thinking about it at the moment. I'm probably needing to think about more things. But these are some things at the moment that I'm thinking about, inspired in particular by Marcuse. The first is Marcuse. You know, he's writing in the 1960s, the 1970s, and he's describing why we have the commodities, the things, the objects in our everyday lives. Why our house is filled with plastic, why we have certain consumption habits and these sorts of things, especially in the US and in advanced industrial democracies. But I would argue in the bourgeois or the upper class of countries across the globe, this seems quite similar. And that how we are reproducing our economic system, the system of production, it requires forms of repression economically, politically, socially, and inherently environmentally. And it at the same time provides an idea of false freedom, that you have so much choice when you go to the store to pick from all of these objects in plastic bottles, but yet you only have the choice of these objects in plastic bottles that are put in front of you for corporations, unless you're in smaller places, these sorts of things. Our choice is not for clean water or for healthy food or for sanitation for all. Our choices for individual decisions. And then, as Rousseau would say, you go into the voting booth every so often and vote and select your next master, right? Okay. So the choice really isn't there in terms of thinking about what is necessity. Now, what is necessity? What we need as humans? This is socially, historically, politically, and spatially dependent. The types of things that are needed by people in communities, while we have our, Maslow hierarchy of needs, food, safety, water, these sorts of things. What we might need in this life, depends on where we are, who we are, what we're doing. Marcuse isn't like anti-technology, but he does warn us that the system of which we're in will dictate how technology acts. Technology, these sort of ways of making things more efficient, they're neither bad nor good for Marcuse. They simply embody the characteristics of the political, social, and economic systems in which they exist. So we could potentially see a better world with AI doing things to help humans rather than reproducing right-wing hate speech on social media environments, for that matter. These sorts of things. This is the sort of similar thread that I want to pull, because I think while Marcuse was writing in the 50s and 60s, life was getting economically better for people in the United States, some more than others. We're still a country built on structural racism, structural inequality, settler colonial acquisition, taking of land, these sorts of things. But we're starting to see more cracks in the system, more cracks in the facade that capitalism is simply providing better things for people. We started to see this in 2008 after the first financial crisis in the United States, where young people were more drawn to socialism and less concerned about the Cold War idea, a discourse of socialism in the US. With Mondani able to win in New York, we're seeing that public and consumer sentiment in the US is really concerned about everyday life and wants to think about and wants to support people talking to prosperity in everyday life. The economy is slowing down, wages are dropping, and there's an impending AI bubble, like an economic bubble, which I'm sure could happen in the same way that our housing bubble or the dot-com bubble that we've seen in previous years. And these sorts of cracks in the facade provide inroads for the kind of visioning that Marcuse describes in his work, and that you'll, I'm sure, be talking about throughout throughout the conference today. So these are the sorts of voices that we need to weave in as we think about, as Douglas Kellner would say, how we might use Marcuse's analysis to, quoting Kellner, this is one of my favorite quotes, to appropriate, work through, develop, and take in new directions the positions and ideas of the historical situation. So while I read Marcuse today, and I read Marcuse for the first time in 2010 and thought, what am I here for? This critique is really still relevant. I thought I came to find the answers, and yet I found Marcuse, and we've not done anything in 50 years. It's this building upon and thinking through these types of things that are going on that we need to be understanding in weaving this together. Now, the material conditions that Marcuse talked about in One-Dimensional Man, in his critique of advanced capitalism, these are still standing. They're morphing in different ways, but they're still quite relevant today. As his critique of our human-environment relations, and this is something that within environmental political theory, there is much taken from Marcuse that we have built on, but he is usually not mentioned as someone that has sort of laid the groundwork in understanding that we need new relations between man and nature, and what this means in changing values and how we engage with the economy and how we think that through. There's been literature in recent years, and I don't have the book in front of me. There's been a lot of work in recent years thinking through this idea of eco-anxiety, that what's going on with the changing climate change, increased environmental degradation is causing, especially in young people, statistically high levels of anxiety, worry, concern, with good reason, being that younger people will live with the effects that we have on the planet for a much longer time. And another thread that I think that we can take, inspired from Marcuse and thinking through this relationship with the environment and the need for a transvaluation of values, a new sensibility, is thinking about how we need to reframe or talk differently perhaps about the climate narrative or the environmental narrative. Perhaps we need to be thinking about reframing in ways of joy instead of tragedy, or flourishing instead of gloom and doom. Now, there's gloom and doom. I'm not saying things are great, but what we find from the psychological literature is that a narrative of tragedy, a continued narrative of tragedy, can lead to environmental melancholy. It leads to increasing anxiety, and it leads to, and I find this research really fascinating, people caring so much that they resort to inability to have movement. They resort to what's called psychological and social defenses, which leave them unable to solve this huge problem in front of them and leave them immobile, disengaged, overwhelmed. Again, with good reason in all of the problems that we have today. But I don't think that, but at the same time, we can use things like voices and experiences from those who have already felt apocalyptic collapse and decline. We see these voices of people that remind us that we can and will sustain in some way. And people like Ghosh remind us that a Western-centric perspective, that our climate change is a tragedy and is decline, is very Western and male-centric. It is a very particular way of framing what is going to happen. And we can tell a different story of what can happen in the future. I'm inspired by people that are attempting this kind of radical visioning with environmental things in this way, because it is so terrible. Like, we just finished, our most recent COP hosted in Brazil, and still, we're every year going through these same sorts of emotions and not getting at some of the root causes and the need to decrease CO2 emissions, for example. And more recently, I've been reading the work of Rob Hopkins, who has been doing this visioning and has a new book out called How to Fall in Love with the Future, where he's asking people to think about a particular type of world and how we would get there. To think about, okay, say we lived in an environment where the bird songs are louder than the cars. You can think about this in Sao Paulo. It's a very noisy place at times. What would we need if we decided that was how we wanted our world to look? What would we need so that the bird songs are louder than the cars? If we decided that everyone was able to have free public transportation, What would we need to do that, right? These are the sorts of things that we consider impossible in a liberal democracy. There's no money for it. People want their car. I'm in Germany right now. People love their car as much as there are buses, right? These are the sorts of questions and encouragement to be getting people to think differently. And a lot of his work is based on work from two psychologists in Melbourne in Australia who find that when you ask people to vision something different, they are more likely to get involved in doing something different later on in proximity to when you've had these sorts of conversations. That even planting the idea changes people's actions in their community. That seems like a very easy kind of thing to think about, and something that is not surprising, that's not supported, as the status quo maintains the systems of power for people who are in power. So these are the sorts of types of visioning that we can do within the environmental end. This also connects then to a thread from Marcuse of Bildung, or education. And I know that we have a person in the crowd here that's studying education within the university. And increasingly, I think this is something newer to me in thinking about critique, but this idea that to become democratic or to become communal, we need to practice that, and it's a skill that we have to work on, is something that we need to be thinking more about constructively. As an academic, as a political theorist, it's really easy to say, we need a better world, we need to be visioning a better world, these sorts of things. But it's very different to go into community spaces, to go into classrooms, to go into workshops and ask people to do this type of work. And in recent years, I've just retired from my role at the university. And one of the things that I've been doing and finding most important is not my academic writing, which I'm very behind on, but rather these sorts of discussions with people as to their own agency and community. And thinking through this idea, a very Marcusean idea, of freedom being one's agency to control one's life. It can be for Marcuse, it's much more individual than we see for other people thinking about utopia and thinking about collective decision-making. He has a very individual focus. And starting from that individual focus of you having this sort of freedom, I mean, the freedom within the collective, but still this kind of freedom, or what is it that gives that to you? These are ways of inspiring people to think about the situations in which they're living. I've done this mostly in Germany and in the United States, but also I was doing this with a program in Colombia for a little while, in Barranquilla. And anywhere you find this sort of idea where people are given the time and space to think about the good life, right? We can go back to the ancients, like, what is the good life? What do you want to be? People become quite critical and quite engaged. And you don't have to do much in terms of like teaching philosophy or political theory or democratic structures or democratic systems. It is much more of an organic approach that people have to understanding the type of life they want to live, the type of agency they want to have in that life, and what that might mean for their engagements with the world around them in these particular sorts of ways. I'll add as well that in this democracy, I think Sheldon Wolin's way of discussing democracy as a horizon, as something that we're never in, as something that we're always striving towards, is a really good way to understand this sort of engagement. That we simply need to be embodying the action of being a member of a community to determine how we live our everyday lives in a very real form, and not just in a theoretical form, not just in an academic form, not just in the structural form, but in the physical embodiment of our everyday life and our everyday forms of engagement. We can critique what kind of democracy we want: deliberative, participatory, radical. We can debate the types of forms that it might take, participatory budgeting, or, et cetera, et cetera. But what we need to be encouraging people to think about and remember is that core of being able to control your life through the way that your environment is controlled is part of this democratic visioning. And I would say it's also an important part of a utopian visioning, and how we can move forward, and what we need to be thinking about is the sort of world that we want to be living in. With that, I want to I'm going to go to a close, because I know it's hard to listen long in a different language, and I hope things that aren't clear, I can answer questions and we can think about these sorts of things. But we're seeing moments of democracy across the world. I mean, we're seeing tensions, and we're seeing the growth of the right wing in lots of ways. But we're also seeing in Europe, in Latin and South America, across the globe, examples, and these are all ones from the US, of people like actively showing that they're not happy, and like huge numbers of people in the US coming out to very peaceful protests, that they're not happy with the way that things currently are. And this is an important opening for thinking about creating spaces for visioning what better future could be. Because when people are not actively visioning the kind of future they want to be living in, the people that are, someone else is visioning the future. And those people will help to determine what it is. And if we, as scholars, as activists, as praxis people, as people who have the privilege to think about this in our everyday life and have space to do so, we need to be thinking about how to support our communities in this way, and how to be thinking about where, from these small ruptures that we're seeing, that we can support this kind of activism and pushing back against a world that we don't want to see, in order to create a world that we do want to see. In the United States, we do have a lot of really beautiful examples and ways of thinking about how things like the civil rights movement was just a dream of activists and people for a very long time, until it was reality. That women's rights were just a dream until it was forced into reality, until it was forged into reality in these ways. Ursula Le Guin writes beautifully about this. The exercise of imagination is dangerous to those who profit from the way things are, because it has the power to show that the way things are not permanent, not necessary, not universal. Her other quote that floats around the internet a lot about we thought that the divine right of kings was unshakable until it wasn't, right? All of these things are impossible until they're not, which is why I very much appreciate Marcuse's push towards this idea that the impossible is not impossible. It is very realistic if we decide to make it that way. And I think through pulling together these threads of understanding the material conditions and critiquing them, of understanding the environmental conditions and thinking about how we frame a beautiful future that we want to live in, of understanding the importance of Bildung, of a non-formal adult education, of the practicing of democratic values, and overall putting these within an idea that we need to actively be encouraging in ways, whatever ways that we can, the idea that another world is possible, it can happen, and that it needs people to do that in more democratic forms. So with that, I will stop the slideshow. I will open it up to see if there are questions or points to discuss further from the audience.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So we can open the question, João.
Hello, Sarah. First of all, thank you for the presentation. I really like to. It's my first time that I'm watching a lecture in English for my master's, and so I'm thankful that I could understand basically everything. So that's the first thing. But what I really want to engage with the debate, because what I'm writing in my master's dissertation here is about this part of Marcuse's theory that the technical parts of the technological and the technical apparatus that a certain period of time has allows allows this perspective of liberation. So it's kind of like we have this kind of perspective that we have the technology to decrease the work time, for example. We can't have this kind of technology, but ideologically and with the power of the capital system, so it's chosen to not have this kind of it's kind of, I don't know if I can say chosen, but it's kind of like this power that engages in this. We can't eliminate toil. We can't eliminate this kind of oppression towards a qualitatively better life for us. So and when you highlight in the end the impossible part, this is very realistic. I think it's the very part of Marcuse that is the Marxian part of Marcuse that is very historically engaged and historically based the what Marcuse wants to talk about. So I think what I'm trying to say is that this kind of analysis can stand today for me as well, because when you talk about all the AI stuff or the robots, all the robot stuff, we can say that they can make our lives better. They can make our qualitatively a better life, and can liberate more time for us to enjoy life. This kind of the ethos of part of what Marcuse said in Early Civilization. So I think that's it. This kind of like, sorry, when I'm trying to articulate, I go on, but it's this. I think when you talk about Mandani, for example, he instigates the kind of imagination of this. But what I think is the next step for me to this imagination is we can sustain a better life in this kind of system, but for us to have some kind of really actually good qualitative better life, we need to suppress. We need to I don't know how to say this. It's suppress this capitalist system. So I think the Mandani figure is really nice. It instigates, but it's the limits of the capitalist system itself. So I think that's my contribution here. Could you understand? It's
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think I have a couple of thoughts, and I think what you are working on is a really great Marcusean topic right now. This idea that, Marcuse, the Marxist part of him, as you said, he wasn't anti-technology. He did think that we could build a better world through better systems where we're not working as much, these sorts of things. And he was writing at a time where we were starting to see that. And I'm old enough to remember that the computer was supposed to do this for me, and that it was supposed to make my life I wouldn't have any paper in my life. My life would be much easier. And all I do is answer emails now, right? Like, we can see how there's the shifting of work and shifting of labor that comes with any new form of technology. And I think the question right now of the role of AI and what that means for the types of jobs that are being replaced, and what it means for actual labor and for people laboring. And if people work less or more hours, we're seeing increasingly people working more hours rather than fewer with this technology. I think this is a great question. I was having a conversation yesterday with a person that works a lot with coding, like uses AI there. And I said, I watched this clip of Elon Musk talking to Joe Rogan, saying that Grok, the AI in X, is great. If you're in a group with your friends, you can use it to make fun, to do a roast where you make fun of your friends. And I'm sitting there going, this is the worst thing I've ever heard. Who needs them to do this, right? Like that's not has anything to do with friendship. It's the same thing with AI art. Like it has nothing to do with the production of art or the making of things or these sorts of things. But in capitalism, this is making lots of money, and we're seeing this AI boom and the impact on the environment and these kinds of things resulting. People that were writing in the 1950s, as we were seeing industrialization in the workplace, proposed that we would only need to work 3 days a week in the factory because the robots and the factory machinery would, not robots at the time, but the machines would do the things for us. And as we see, no, it just replaces labor and exploits people in different ways. And I think that's a really great topic for thinking about Marcuse in these ways and what is possible and maybe what technology we don't need. It's not that we need everything. You know, we don't need to develop something just because we can, I would argue to this way. On the point of, I agree, I'm a little excited about Mondani at the moment. And I can be plenty critiqued on that, and so can people on the left. But I use it as this counter to the fact that people say, oh, it's not possible. Oh, you have money in politics. Oh, you have corporations with control. Oh, you have important people that will make sure things don't happen. Oh, why we can't have politicians that are saying more progressive things. And New York is a city of 10 million people. Like it is not a small place, one of the largest economies in the world. And yet we see that there. And for me, it's these moments of showing that people are very much supporting this type of policy, that people on the left or people that want a better world that looks like that need to leverage better. Like rather than simply critiquing, well, okay, yeah, it was one thing, it was New York. Like this is the type of social dreaming of a possibility that we need to like promote and facilitate rather than simply say, okay, that's New York. Moving on to the next thing. We don't have a lot of them. And it's that building of momentum, I think, that we need to be doing. I had a lot of critique of people after Occupy Wall Street in 2008. Again, I'm old, so I was like there at the time of it going on. And it was a beautiful moment that then wasn't there anymore. And you have people writing about it. You have David Graeber, for example, there writing about it and saying like, this isn't going to save us. This is not like changing the system fundamentally. But if the social movement theory in the United States, the literature shows that people that were involved with Occupy Wall Street went on to do other activist things. Like many went in to be involved in the Sunrise Movement a few years later to think about climate change and these sorts of things. It's this getting started, it's this getting involved that we like empirically know from the literature that when people are leveraged enough to do that can lead to this longer term change of how they understand the world, how they think they can engage with the world, and what they think they could do with the world. Doesn't mean that everyone is that way, but it means that we need to hold on to these that we have and amplify this sort of activity and see how to replicate it in other ways. That's what I would argue for from that. But
so
thank you for the question and comment. I hope to read your work on Marcuse and technology at some point because there is a lot to be said.
Sarah, I have some questions and I will try to organize the ideas here. But first, thank you for amazing presentation and this kind of evocation for us to think more critical theory beyond the diagnosis. That's something that I'm thinking a lot about. How much the word diagnosis appear in the last years in critical theory literature. And I think that that's a point that we have to change. Maybe we have to return to the interpretation, the world of interpretation, like Freudian perspective, the interpretation of the dreams, the interpretation of a lot of things that we have, not just diagnosis. And when you said the problem of now of critical theory to make diagnosis and critique and stop there and not move forward to think the possibilities of transformation. I think that's a really good point, and utopia is a good point for helping us. But a question I would like to think, if I understood the one of your slides is about the population that support or not support Zohan and Como. Two groups make me feel two groups I would like to think about: the Black people and the lower income people that not support so much Mandani as supported Como. And that's interesting to think, because they are the basis, the poorest people in this. And I want to think about this because it's impressive, the voters for Mandani, but these two groups makes me think about this kind of what's happening with these two groups. And one thing I would like to share, I don't know if it's a good idea, is like you said, the necessity to think the everyday life of the people. Because if we think Trump and Joe Biden election, Joe Biden was doing the homework, the homework. The tax of jobs is okay, the economy is okay, but I don't know. There is something that push people for think Trump as an alternative, a better alternative than Kamala and others. Maybe because the economy of this homework, Joe Biden's homework, is not the everyday life economy of the people. If you think about the work in liberal perspective, we have work, we are working, but what kind of work we have? How many time we have to work to have a good salary for our necessities, and so on and so on. So there is a gap between the real economy and the economy of the statistics. The statistics that makes me think about, there is the same case for just two people, the Black movement and the lower income people, to think about it. Okay, and the other question, the other question is about why we are not in think about the alternatives as a Mark Fisher question. Huh? So I believe one thing is about what we are, as you said, we will lost a lot of things if we follow the alternatives, because we don't have the same, it's a kind of parasite. We will kill the order with this alternative, and we are afraid of it, and this afraid makes us to rescue the values of the status quo, to make a democracy that works, and so on, and not that's interesting as you present the the workshop you made with your students, and the students think like everyone would think in this world. What's the cost, not what are the end of this politics, what we want to do with this politics, and so on and so on. And I think if there is a kind of mentality, this kind of imagination, colonized imagination, that make us to become afraid of this changing, and to think that how ridiculous is the change and not how important it is to change. And Zohan, I believe that made us to think more about it. The one question I have is the experience we are having now in Chile, for example, because Chile has a change of the power, and with this discourse, the president now is a young guy with new ideas, and they try to do something to, for example, a radical, a substantial change to change the constitution, because it's a Pinochet dictatorship's constitution, and it needs to do, but he lost a lot of support in that. So what I believe that's the question of João Pedro too. What's the next step to not do the same thing Chile is doing? Because now the last election is not good for the left-wing parties. So sorry for this confusion.
No, I think this is great. Silvio, I appreciate it. And we'll start from the end, because we're also seeing the slipping of democratic socialists or social democrats from power in Europe, right? We're not just magically seeing this rise of the left everywhere, even though we have seen good election results in places like Brazil, for example. I think that on the left, we tend to, and I'll even say this will be my critique about some of these ways that we kind of close our minds off. You don't see the same sort of closure on the right in ways. The right has been incredibly persistent. For example, across the world, but in the United States, pushing to reduce women's rights in terms of rules around marriage, rules around abortion, rules around bodily autonomy. After the 1960s and 70s, people might say, don't need to worry about it anymore. Everyone assumes women will have these rights. Of course, they're never going away. We came forward. We're not going back. And yet, we are going backwards in many places, right? The failure of imagination is a failure to say that we could go backwards, or a failure to say we could do something different. On the right, their imagination was like, no, we can do this. And yes, they did. So I think that on the left, we are great at being critical. And this is very important, that we critique. A ruthless critique of everything existing, right? I mean, this is foundational. But I think that sometimes it doesn't allow us to move forward, because it also stops utopian visioning or visioning of a better world. Because look what happened in Chile. Now it's a backslide. Or see, we tried it here and it didn't work. Let's just not. Like, that is not an answer that I think we should have. But it is an answer that's really common. And I do this too, right? Because this is sort of the mentality that we don't get to have the nice, if there is a failure, then we're done. In the United States, it was heartbreaking after Bernie did not get the Democratic nomination, not just because Bernie did not get the nomination, but because a lot of people said, that's it. We didn't win this time. I'm done. I'm done with politics. We can't win. We're a loser. We can't lose. It won't work. I'm over it. I lost. I'm sad. I'm done. And if you look at the history of social movements, for example, in the United States, you don't get to be the winner usually if you're in the movement. You're doing the movement for the future. You're doing the movement because you want the better world. You're doing the movement because you know that you have to do this for other people. And I think a big problem today is that with our dopamine society, where we like to have the win and the short term and our decreased attention, that it's even easier to convince people that if something is going to take a long time, it can't happen. You know, when I was reading Godse's book, I was re-looking at this book because I love it. I don't know if you've seen it. These are the sorts of things that need to be reminders, right? That we've had better worlds. It's not new. This idea is not new, but we say it is, and the right says it is. And even mainstream people say it's crazy because they don't want to lose power. But I was looking over my notes in it, and I was reminded of one of my favorite propagandists that I encountered in college, Kropotkin, you know, and from The Conquest of Bread, 1874, I think. And I wrote down the quote again because it's just like what I think we have to be reminding ourselves, especially people who study critique and who are very ready to critique. Quote, struggle so that all may live this rich, overflowing life. And in that struggle, you will find a greater joy than anywhere else. Right? I mean, this is the Angela Davis of the struggle is part of the life. It's not something you're going to achieve. It's something that you're always doing. And it's something that if you have the privilege to do, you should be doing, right? So I know it sounds a little idealistic, and sometimes I'm more idealistic than other times, but we need to be idealistic. We need to set the bar up high and even come here, or we're going to stay down here, even if it sounds crazy. And again, this is the problem with the left, and I'm there too. I'm not just saying, I think it's a whole thing of how we do critique, and we do critique too well, so well that we are ready to also tear down what could be built, because we'll say, one person, one loss, backslide is done. And we need to have the long-term vision of a successful strategy. And if we look at the right, they have had a very successful strategy. That's my hope. I am a whole little hopey changey right now. It's not always the case, but you have to be, or why do it?
And you have reasons for that. Also, there is a lot of possibilities with this change in the political sense.
I've been doing tons of presentations about responses to the Trump administration, civil society, protest movements at the moment, trying to explain this in Germany because it's like a hot topic and people want to know. And it's really beautiful to see not your usual people out saying, I don't agree with this. I was in the US in April, and I went to the first No Kings rally. And I'm out at this in my tiny town in, Salisbury, out in the country, like very small town. And there were like 200 people out in my tiny town, mostly white. And another academic came up to me and said, oh, I wish it wasn't so white and old. Just old white people are here. And I said, what? It's great. White old people need to be here. Like, they vote, they have power. They need to stand up and put their bodies on the line for people. Of course, brown people are not here. They're being picked up by ICE. They're scared. They shouldn't be here. Like, we should be doing this in our position of power and privilege and these sorts of things. And these are the reminders that we need, right? That it is possible. The minute we say it's not possible, it's not, right? We give up. We let someone else have agency over us. We give up our freedom. We give up our ability to have the life we want when we say we can't do it. Someone else will take that power.
Perfect.
I came a little late, actually a lot late, but I would like to just make a brief commentary. You said about this this need for imagination, and when we kind of see some scenarios, some analysis, when we got so upset that we cannot think straight or imagine possible futures. And I kind of say that a lot. There is this kind of a biographical note. I don't know if either it was a conversation or letters exchanged between Lenin and Trotsky. And I think it's about in January of 1917, 1 month before the February Revolution. And Lenin comes to Trotsky and say, well, I think we're never going to see a revolution whatsoever. And then 1 month later, they are at a revolutionary context. And I think that's kind of illustrate the perspective that we put. Like, we cannot ever abandon any imaginary possibility, or using imagination as a tool, actually. And we cannot ever abandon this as a critical tool, as an analytical tool. And that's it. That's, as I can actually very late, this is the only comment I can make right now.
I think it's a lovely reminder. Like, I appreciate it. I think it's a good reminder that we don't know where we plant the, I mean, we say, you plant the seeds and they grow somewhere and you never know. And it's true. Like, you don't know. But we can't operate like the tree isn't going to grow. We need to operate like the seeds we are planting are going to grow into something. When I'm speaking to mostly professors, I always, especially when I'm doing my pedagogy work, I always try to remind people that are teachers that we don't know the impact that we have on our students. And every once in a while, I got like 5 emails this year that are like, oh my gosh, I remember this from your class. This changed my life. Actually, Silvio, you know a couple from some of the Marcuse stuff, right? Like, I had a student, well, this was negative, but she said, I'm sitting in the Library of Congress because she's working for a congressperson. She came with me to Canada to the conference, and she said, and I was so sad that people aren't going to have critical theory classes anymore under Trump, like yours, kind of thing. But the fact that, like, she was thinking critically about what this means. But I often have students say, like, this thing really affected me and I didn't realize that till later, and I just want to thank you. And we don't get that a lot. It's beautiful when you do. We do not get it a lot, but we have to act like it does and assume that it does. In the way that you say, because we don't know when it's going to change. And if we're not actively working like it can change, it's not going to. And again, I'll pull it back to Marcuse, like, since most people in here are students. So I remember reading him in 2010, thinking like, oh my God, we have the critique. Like, we know there's no shock as to what's going on with the creation of so much garbage, which was the question I had as a graduate student. And it reminds us that, like, we have to continue to try to find the engagement, because we got critique. It's fun to write critique. It's great. I have my whole library of books here. I love thinking about it. But it's this actual, like, visioning, putting something forward that's way more a part of yourself and way more likely to get critiqued than, an academic treatise on something. So we still need those as well. But yeah, I appreciate your example with the need for imagination.
I will take his verse also. I thought this was very refreshing, since we've been across this postmodern man, shattered man, and hopeless, and who lost faith in the institutions and politics and technology. And we, at the same time, are crushed by capitalism and new technology. No, I have to do this crap AI and stuff like that, because we cannot choose that, right? But I think I'm with him that the utopia is a possibility for imagination, and maybe is a good answer to this anxiety and this hopeless and this lack of faith in public life and whatever else.
Yeah, and I do think that yeah, on some levels, I was never. Once I was persuaded by Marcuse, I really liked the critique he provided. It was hopeful, it was radical, it was feminist, it was ecological, it was these sorts of things. And then you read these postmodern folks, and you think about the postmodern folks today, and you're like, oh my goodness, like Baudrillard, everybody would just, what would they be, saying about, where we are at the moment? And I'd be curious to think about Foucault and utopia, because honestly, Sylvia, that surprised me a bit. So that's great. I'd like to think about it, but yeah, there's the danger in thinking about utopia is that people will critique you. They'll make fun of you. They'll say you're incorrect, because it's easier, whether you want to or not, to maintain positions of power, structures of power. Sylvia, this was your comment from the very beginning. Like, why are we afraid? Why are we not? I wrote down. Why are we not? Why are we doing nothing about the alternatives? Why are we afraid of the alternatives? Partially, we're afraid of the alternatives because of the limitation of the discourse by people who don't want us to think differently. But also, alternatives, I think Graeber wrote a little bit about this too. Like, change in a system doesn't mean it's going to be good. And the cracks of liberal democracy do not mean we move to socialism. Like, it means we could move to something much worse like fascism. And, these are the things that we have to be actively thinking about. I think it's much easier to be passive in this political, in politics. It's hard. It's hard to be active and even to be wrong. Your point about the African-American voting, yeah, and economic, yeah, that's a problem. They need to be thinking about that. These are always ways for improvement, and we should take them as, okay, how do we better do this? How do we better reach people? What do we need to do? Rather than, there are these problems kind of thing. I think we are too ready, and I also to frame failures rather than opportunities. I don't want to sound like an inspirational quote, like, oh, every closed door is an open window, or something like that. But it's true that, like, if we shift and say, okay, how do we do better? How do I get him to do better? How do I get people I'm working with to do better? How do I do this better? Like, that is the way to be thinking about always better, rather than thinking about failure, that's bad, these kinds of things. I have seen anecdotally amazing personal growth in people who have been confronted with new things that they had never thought about before and never understood. But when it comes to LGBTQ relationships, trans people, like all of these sorts of things, that people never having to confront this, to deal with it, to love people in ways that you understand difference, right? And you can see huge personal growth. And we all have examples of seeing big personal growth in people who change their mind for the better, like become always better. I've always said that I don't want to be 25-year-old Sarah. Like, I had a lot to improve. Like, we always need to be thinking about this improvement, and rather than just hard and critical. But now I sound like an inspirational person and not an academic, but maybe we need a bit more hope in that. And it's funny because in my head, I'm doing the capitalist thing. I'm going like, oh, this is just silly to say this. And now I sound like someone, like, this is what, but we've got to get out of our heads sometimes. That might not translate so well.
Thank you.
Okay, more questions? So
I have one question.
So,
I was waiting.
go ahead.
So,
Yes.
I have some commentaries and a question after. So I will try to elaborate in the best way possible, because I have the English, the distance, so it's kind of weird to think about it. So here I go. First of feedback, I really liked, Sarah, the presentation. I came here with nothing in my mind, because I heard like utopia. What? I don't know anything about it. I don't know what they are gonna talk about it. But when you start talking, I saw like, I am here. This thing makes sense. This is not just like philosophers saying things just for themselves. There's a point here. So my first commentary is a little bit about my bias right now. So I am reading Nietzsche, and I really see the light part of him, and he brings me to think about a little question that will make sense with my question that I will do, because I feel a lot that there's a lot of the skepticism, there's a lot of this perspective, so this is the part of analyzing the problem. But the jump of doing something about it, it just didn't happen yet. And when I see someone like you talking about it, I see, okay, now we are coming to this moment. Like, I am in the moment that something needs to happen because it's our life in the line, right? So I think you really need to have a pragmatism right now. Like you were saying about, let me see. I think it's Marcuse was talking about it, that we need actually features to think about it, even if it's kind of silly, the ideas. We need to do something, just start. So I'm really interested in what you were doing, because you said that you finished your professional work or something like that, and now we're doing something different. Or the Zoran, how Zoran did something about it, because here in Brazil, I see there is a really different context, and I'm just curious to know what you did so that we can think something about Brazil. That's it.
Absolutely. I appreciate your comments and openness to coming to a talk, even when you're deep in Nietzsche at the moment. Yeah, I started by saying, I'm bringing in a very American perspective at the moment, and I don't pretend to speak for other places and what can be done, but I do think that the sharing of information and ideas is incredibly important, cross collaboration in these sorts of ways. I always give the example of participatory budgeting in Brazil, because I love that it's from Brazil, right? This thing that we're using in New York and Chicago and places all over the world, and sharing, as we call it in political science, policy diffusion in this way. So I'll speak first a little bit to what I'm doing. I just retired from my job in Maryland, which is crazy. I'm not that old, but you can become retired at some point, because I've moved to Germany. And I had been living between two countries for a long time. And to me, the best way to strengthen democratic institutions and community participation in the world in which we live is to be able to be involved in your community. And I did that in Salisbury when I was there, and I couldn't do that when I was living in two countries. And that really was difficult for me, because I want to be involved in my community in ways, because I think that one of the best ways to fight hate, rightward movements, these sorts of things, is through solidarity, mutual aid, community-based efforts. We also need larger scale political change, but those sorts of things are super important to me, and so that's why I left my job and I'm doing this. Right now I'm learning a lot of German, so that's my current, I'm a student again. But here in Germany, what I've been doing is civic education work, which is somewhat what I did in the US, and basically doing workshops, not only for students, but more for adults, because there's a whole system that's, I think, really fantastic of non-formal adult education. This idea of continuing education in Germany is, I think, like, I really appreciate it. And they have opportunities, for example, in every Bundesland, like every state except for Bavaria, your employer is required to let you take 1 week of educational vacation each year, Bildungsurlaub, which to me sounds like a dream. I'm like, oh, I love to learn. And so they don't, you don't have to take vacation time for this. They give you vacation time, and sometimes they pay for it and sometimes they don't, depending on if it's related to your job or whatnot. And so I've been doing a lot of seminars about American politics, Trump, these sorts of things. First of all, to explain social movements, how we're seeing change, where we've seen change through the civil rights movements, disability rights movements, and resistance in ways to inequality. That's one sort of thing that I've been doing, and working with people from the age of basically 16 to 80, which is really fascinating. And the other part of that is working also in these spaces around questions of democracy and democratic practice and democratic visioning. And I have the opportunity in these spaces to talk with adults, people that aren't in school anymore and doing lots of different types of jobs, and really get them to really think, like, what is the good life? Like, as people that study theory or in school, thinking about the good life, the sort of ancient, kind of idea is one thing. But when people have the space to do it, they really appreciate stopping, pausing, and thinking, how do I actually want my community to look? Rather than, I live in a community and maybe I can do something or maybe I can't. Along with that, I've been doing work along using social organizing tactics and ways of social organizing in the US, and doing workshops on that in Germany as well, because there's different methods of organizing that we can learn through this kind of cross collaboration. So I know that we're getting shorter on time. I love talking about that. I've got lots of different ideas for that. But basically it's been working with outside of academics. Having a PhD behind your name gets you into places, right? To say, like, I'm an expert. And then you can do these spaces where you have these kind of creative opportunities. And it's been really nourishing for me, and I've learned a lot from people, and this is one reason why I'm more hopeful today than I've been in my life, probably. I mean, it's a low bar, but as someone who studies environment and democracy.
Okay. Well, we are finishing now because of the time.
Yeah, sorry. I hope I didn't go too long.
I would like to thank you because for this beginning of this conference. I believe that your words improve our thinking during these days, and as I'm thinking about this idea, the idea of the utopia. For Horkheimer is the proof of the pudding. Just have to take the utopia, the truth of this utopia when the revolution begins, and that's the only way to prove. But I think, another, as a Marcusean way, the question is for Marcuse. For me, Marcuse is thinking about, okay, is the pudding proof? But what are the recipe of this pudding? How we can bake this pudding and make the world a better world, so on, so on. So, as you said, you have a lot of actions. We have a lot of with critique and with the diagnosis. That is an important point, and I appreciate your words for that, for start and accept this invitation. And I hope you can go return to Brazil someday, maybe in Minas Gerais.
I'm always ready to visit.
Thank you a lot, Sarah.
You'll be welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Silvio. And I always appreciate the fellowship and the good feelings that I have working in and with people from Brazil. It's just a very different feeling than in Germany.
Maybe. Okay. Thanks a lot, Sarah.
Take care and good luck with the rest of the conference. Thank you for allowing me to have this conversation and learn from you today.
Thank you. I will put just words for the final information now. If you want to go, Sarah.
Yeah, I'll head out. Thank you very much. Feel free to be in touch.
Okay, we will be.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So, então, vamos lá. A conferência vai seguir, né, de hoje ainda, vai ter a oficina de Seminário Utopia com o Thiago aqui, à tarde, às 2h30. Lá não vai ser aqui, vai ser lá no laboratório de filosofia, acho que o Daniel conhece. Né? É lá no Alfa 1. Não se assustem com esse nome, eles não me parentes, é só um lugar para a gente pensar junto. E aí segue, né? À noite, quem for seguir à noite, a gente vai ter a exposição. Eu estou deixando nos espaços a lista de presença para vocês terem certificados. É isso. De almoço, eu acredito que uma parte de vocês já conhece aqui, mas uma boa parte não. A gente tem o bandejão aqui, né? Não sei qual é o cardápio do dia, já sabe?
Não, não olhei. Eu sei que não é peixe.
Então.
Ontem foi peixe, então hoje não é.
Eu pedi para eles.
Cardápio social.
Na USP a gente tinha um ovo maravilha. Tem, para quem é vegetariano, tem versão vegetariana. Então, acho que é o melhor lugar, assim, para almoçar, porque aqui a região não é muito bem provida, né? Tem os lugares na Kennedy, um pouco mais longe e tal, vocês podem ir, mas aqui eu acho que o bandejão seria o melhor. E é isso, então a gente retorna aí às 2h30, isso? Às 2. E aí a gente vai se falando. Vai ver no canal.
Vou ter que sair, vou levar meu carro aqui no sítio, mas aí a gente já volta no outro bem. Tá bom? Foi surpresa, né? Eu vi depois da programação.
Pois é, eu tinha passado de longa data.
Ah, não tá aí, não. Posso ir como é que tá o meu vídeo?
Tá bem, na verdade.